more on these fashion houses and the perception that customers have of them from Manfred Abraham. He's head of brand strategy at Interbrand. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So let's talk about Prada first of all, because it is going to debut in the Hong Kong stock market.
Yeah. Fourth time lucky, right?
Yeah. What does this do for a company's brand perception? Does this make it more accessible? Does it make it less exclusive? What does it do for the image?
Well, I think overall it's quite important for a brand like Prada to be listed on the stock market, because it's going to give it the financial power to expand in a way that it has been trying to do for quite a few years, and it's difficult to raise that amount of money on your own.
So they want to raise brand awareness by getting more shops out across Asia and
That's right. If you look at the luxury market, they got to have a presence of a flagship store in the right locations, in the on Bond Street, on Fifth Avenue. Prada's already done that, but they really want to expand into Asia in a much more aggressive way, because a lot of the luxury goods spending today is really shifting towards Asia.
And it's very, very expensive, of course, to have those top locations. Let's move on to H&M and this partnership with Versace. I'm wondering what the motivations are for a designer like Versace. Do they need the money?
Well, I think it's really good exposure if you think about suddenly being on the high street, being accessible to a lot of people who probably love fashion, but couldn't maybe afford the clothes.
But isn't the whole point that this is exclusive and that not just anybody can afford it? And isn't that the image that Versace's been building for so long? Why then put your clothes in H&M?
Well, if you think about most of the luxury labels have got diffusion lines, or have got sunglasses and perfumes and all sorts of other aspects that pretty much everyone can buy into. And getting exposure and being visible on the high street just helps you to shift some of those other goods.
So it's publicity. Does it actually, though, lead to more sales, higher sales of the expensive stuff, the real stuff?
Yeah. Well, if you look at what happened with the other collaboration, it was always very good for the designers as well as for H&M, so it's worked very well.
All right, let's talk about Dior, Galliano. We've got Galliano in court today on charges of racial slurs, making racial slurs. Now, it's interesting to look at this, because fashion labels are only as good as their designers. They're very often defined by their designers, but things happen. People die in the case of Alexander McQueen. People have to be fired in the case of Galliano. So are these high fashion labels, does that model lend itself to public companies, to a model in which investors own shares?
Well, I would argue that some of those brands, or most of those brands, are much bigger than the designer that sits behind the brand. I think it's important you get the right designer that fits the brand that you've built. The image and the philosophy needs to be right. If you think of Sarah Burton, probably 2 years ago, no one knew who Sarah Burton was. A few months ago, she designed the wedding dress for the royal wedding. So, obviously, behind the Alexander McQueen label, it's important you get the designer right, but changes with the designer, not necessarily bad for the brand. If you think of Gucci, when Tom Ford came into the brand,
right, but Tom Ford didn't get sacked for making racial comments. What has the impact been on Dior? Is there any evidence that this has hurt its image or even its sales?
Well, I don't think it has hurt its sales, but it's certainly not good for the image. But Dior is, again, it's a big brand. It's built its brand consistently over years. It will be able to overcome this by putting the right effort behind, the right publicity behind.
All right, Manfred Abraham, head of brand strategy at Interbrand. Thanks very much for shedding light on the world of fashion and business for us.